So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your organization, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm live in Denver, probably 25 years into the world of technology. Myself, my early days were in the world of IT and healthcare. Spent some probably 5 years or so at the Mayo Clinic back in the early 90s, helping them with various things. Moved to Colorado in the mid 90s, and embarrassed to say that my first startup here was a electronic bill presentation and payment software company, which you think about the fact that we've only been able to get our bills online for the last 20 years seems kind of crazy, but I guess that is the reality.
Innovation travels in different speeds and different places and different industries.
Yeah, I mean, because it feels like it's one of those things you've had forever, right? What do you mean I can't get my bill online? But back then it was really hard because your call detail records and your cell phone bill and your long distance bills were complicated documents with different tax charges and interlata, this, that, and the other thing. So it's kind of like the Amazon bill today. So like if you look at an Amazon bill today and your old long distance bill from the 80s, it kind of has some similarities.
Exactly.
So
I still find it funny that we're still using that construct of a monthly invoice after all this time and all the technology that's happening. People still need that monthly construct.
Monthly construct. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's funny, just as an aside, I ran a bulletin board system back in my early days, and my mom would always wonder why I got phone bills that were like that big. And I think I tried to explain to her once, but it never really went anywhere. And she was really good because I'd call her up and so I would say, hey, node number 3 needs to get rebooted. So she'd walk down to the basement and try to figure out where node 3 was and go, hit the power and power back on. But yeah, never could understand why I got phone bills that were like that.
I used to run a BBS too, back in Toronto.
Did you?
What software were you running on?
Gosh, man, it has been a while. I want to say, I feel like I tried them all because it was back then where you're trying to do 386 virtualization and like desk view or something like that. And then I switched over to Linux and was primarily running on Linux for a while. I actually wrote a UART code for a multi-port serial card that didn't exist back in the day.
Fantastic. Oh, I remember those days. I had a 2-line BBS running on, first I was on Wildcat and then it was running on PC board for a while.
I think PC board out of Salt Lake. There was one out of Salt Lake City. Yeah, I think I probably used both of those too. Yep. Yeah, that's crazy. That's fun. It was fun. It was fun time. I mean, I never had more than 100 users, but it was amazing to think back then that you could actually do mail relay. And it could take, a couple hours to go move an email from one side of the U.S. to the other, but eventually it worked, and it worked pretty reliably.
Oh yeah.
Now we do it instantaneously, but yeah. Then I went to work for Sun Microsystems. Spent 12 years there. Was a distinguished engineer there. Worked a lot with labs, mostly on, security technology related to network systems, and actually, my funnest time there was probably spent kind of 2-3 years on distributed computing, and trying to take biology and use the concepts of homeostasis and the way systems work from a biological perspective, and try to translate it back to technology and use it to better create systems that were more survivable, more, maybe less precise in some ways, but ultimately more accurate because they could deal with some of the nuances and changes and things like that. And ultimately that became some of the technology that we used for our containers, which were called zones back then. And then Oracle bought us, and I said, that was time to probably move on, because Sun and Oracle.
Yeah, I hear working at Oracle is not a picnic.
it was really weird because I was sort of in an engineering role and got put under marketing, and they said, don't go talk to customers. And there was like this one line in the spreadsheet that our boss really cared about, which was some, solution guide deliverable, and didn't want us doing anything else. So I'm like, I got out of there as fast as I could. I think I got actually one paycheck from Oracle, maybe two, but, and then went to VMware. At VMware ran, and this was sort of the early days of cloud. So some of the other stuff I worked on at Sun was N1, which was sort of our view of autonomous computing or ubiquitous computing or whatever it might be. And then went to VMware, ran a software engineering unit there that was focused on the service providers, and getting them kind of up and running on cloud technology to offer back to their customers. And then eventually came to BioWest, which became Flexential. So I've been here for the last 10 years, ran the cloud line of business for BioWest, and then at Flexential, I'm sort of a, I get to spend my days thinking about what's next, and doing things like this, and spend my time on product strategy a bit, and run our customer advisory council. So spend a fair amount of time with our customers and trying to figure out where they're going, and making sure that our solutions are lined up, kind of to meet their needs. And sort of maybe about Flexential, and I'll just push this up here just because it's kind of interesting. We are a data center operator, and this is roughly our footprint. So we happen to be in a lot of these tier. We used to have, I think Calgary's still up there. We were actually owned by BioWest, was bought by Shaw Communications.
Hey, I used to work for Shaw. Believe it or not.
In IT or in where? What part?
I worked. I ran their Eastern Region internet service prior to it being. Well, actually, I used to work for a company called CUC, which was bought up by Shaw, and then I moved from the regular cable side, IT side of things, into their new internet service division, which they first started doing with At Home, and then built their own stuff. So I ran all of Ontario when they had Ontario. This prior to this, did Rogers and Shaw swapped some properties, right? So Shaw's like monolithic on the West Coast. But I remember visiting their offices in Calgary.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I was at Sun, I was actually doing a lot of the At Home stuff. So I was up in Calgary probably for 2 years, kind of back and forth, when I was at Sun. So yeah, that's funny. It is a small world. Did you work for, was Dennis Steiger still there? Maybe does that name sound familiar?
The name sounds really familiar. I remember the whole Shaw crowd, and I remember it was really funny because it's almost like, how sometimes they pick senior leadership based on the skills they have. It's like if the boss is like a lawyer, they like to pick lawyers to work with them. Well, they're all musicians,
right?
So they all had some instrument that they played, right? And they actually had a band that they played at the Christmas party. It's like all the senior leadership would get up on stage, and I'm like, I'm looking at them and I'm going, like, are you not allowed to become a leader at this company unless you play some kind of instrument? And what if you suck?
That's pretty funny. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, great company, and it's funny because nobody ever leaves there. So you're like one of the first persons I've talked to that actually don't, that have worked there and aren't still there. So.
Yeah. Oh no, everyone loves it there. It's great.
But yeah, so I mean, Flexential, we're a data center operator. We build these sort of beautiful looking, our data centers really are a product. This is the new Hillsboro 3, if you can see that.
Nice.
So, I would say about a quarter of our footprint are these Gen 4, Tier 4 facilities that have a mezzanine and are really, showcases. You can kind of walk in, you've got a boardroom or sets of boardrooms, and you can see all the equipment, and they're huge. Like this one behind me is 200,000 square feet, 36 megawatts. Nice. But we're kind of in the retail business, so it's not, why we want to go after the hyperscalers. We're more about, the banks, the CDN platforms, the social media, companies, the large ERP platforms. I mean, that's kind of our bread and butter, while we have some workloads from the hyperscalers like Microsoft and people like that. isn't what we're primarily going for. What we really think is our value prop is sort of creating the, the network and providing the connectivity between these locations. So that network you see back there is actually not just representative, it does exist. So when you're in one of our locations, you have access to all of them, and then you have access to cloud connectivity and now access to really over there, I guess, to some of the fastest connectivity into Asia and Australia, New Zealand. And in fact, we're working right now on a cable landing that will be the fastest connection into India from the US. And so
fantastic. We need that.
Right. So
faster is better.
Faster is better. And 50% of the internet traffic is now, in Asia, right? So, I mean, it's so important to have great connectivity there. And then recently we just announced, I should mention, we run our cloud and managed services platform on about half of the footprint. So most of the regions we have cloud and disaster recovery services, and most of that is for, I would say, mid-market enterprise that don't want to, they might have a DBA, but they don't want 10. So they've got a really smart DBA, and then we augment their DBA staff with 24/7. We do a fair amount of security and compliance consulting as well. We're PCI QSAs, so we can declare compensating controls for the credit card industry. We're high trust CSFs. Do a lot of NIST, NIST 800, ISMS, ISO. What else can I tell you? 4,000 customers, pretty all over the place. No big segments, other than the usual suspects like healthcare is big, financial services, technology.
Right. So you don't actually go for the small guys. Like, you're not at the AWS level. Like, if I had a startup and I wanted to put my stuff on that's typically not what you do. You're more of a, like you said, mid-market provider.
We're on the, mid enterprise to above. So we don't, startups probably aren't, we do have a lot of startups that use our security consulting services, but it's more to help them with, penetration testing or IoT testing. Actually, that's been, we've disassembled robots and reassembled them, and have started to look at like circuitry and things like that on IoT, exploits and things like that. But that's kind of a very specialized, that was actually a group we bought in Boulder in 2015 called Applied Trust. So they wrote the book on, I don't know if you remember the Linux administration handbook that we've all had probably at one point in time. They actually were some of the authors of that, and then had a security practice that sort of sat on top of that. And now they've morphed. They do manage, Kubernetes on top of Amazon and things like that, that don't necessarily live within our footprints, but help our customers really reach into the world of hybrid and really look at hybrid IT.
Right. So I have a number of financial services customers, and they're always really leery of cloud still, even after how many years are we? 20 years, more than 20 years now that, companies are moving. They're still leery of it. How do you help convince them that this is the way to go? Because I believe it's the way to go, but how do you help convince them that it's the way to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's the question of I still think from the survey data that I read and talking with their customers, the top two reasons that people aren't either on the cloud or have moved some of their workloads off, like we call it the boomerang effect, where they've kind of gone to it somewhat maybe more wholesale, and then they've come back. It's security and compliance are one of the biggest ones, and the cost concerns being the other one. The fact at the end of the day isn't that the cloud isn't any less secure or more secure than anything else, right? I think 4 or 5 years ago it was probably a question of expertise. Did you have the right resources to be able to configure and run your environment properly? But that's just a maturity issue at the end of the day. So there's nothing inherently less or more secure. I think there is a bit of a auditability factor. It's very easy to send an auditor into one of our facilities, and we can change our processes and procedures based on who that customer is, versus on the hyperscalers, you kind of get what you get, which I think ultimately, is a little bit of like, you can't go send an auditor to an Amazon facility, right? You got to be happy with their audit report. So I think it's just a maturity cycle. But, if anything, over the last, 7-8 months of the pandemic, cloud resources are a huge enabler to be able to grow your services and scale them. You look at Zoom and the success that Zoom has had.
Yeah.
They couldn't have done that if they were just, buying equipment and installing it. It just wouldn't have worked for them. So,
Oh yeah. Well, that's exactly what I said. When my first startup was probably about 10, 15 years ago. And that was, we went straight to Heroku. We were thinking, oh, what are we going to do?
right.
Create, buy servers, do this, do that. No, the infrastructure is there. Just slap down your credit card and boom, you're done. Right.
Yeah.
Yep,
you're done.
And then when you need more cycles, you just, push it up, push it down. I mean, it costs you, but it's so simple. And, you don't have to go through all these contortions. So, I mean, the startup nowadays it makes no sense to do it any other way.
I would agree. I think, there becomes a point, and we probably have looked at this in like a 20-year life cycle of a company, perhaps. And I think that first, 2, 3, 4 years where you're really more experimenting, you've got a lot of VC money that might be coming in, you've got investors, the bottom line is negative, right? So you don't, care as much about profitability. Ultimately that changes at some point, right? There becomes a point in time where you either got to scale, differently. You're worried about EBITDA. You might be worried about, I've got, capital versus OpEx. All these different things then come into play once you've become big enough to generate, your own revenue and almost standalone, set of services. And that's where a provider like us can kind of come in and say, hey, we can help you. And Joe Weinman did a great book, called Cloudonomics, that talks about this, where there's a set of services that you run every single day. You know how much capacity you need. We probably can optimize the cost structure on that. And then there's a set of services that are dynamic, stochastic, that are seasonal or demand-based, and those make sense in the cloud. The key is being able to link that together in some hybrid model and make it work together, which is, I think, frankly, what most companies would probably prefer, because it is hard to be CFO friendly sometimes in the hyperscalers when you do get those bills that are so complicated that people don't even know what, like, I've seen conversations where the CFO and the head of development are in a room and they're like, well, I don't know what these things are. Like, I don't know what to turn off because I don't know what's production versus what's not. So, I mean, the fact that you can just swipe a credit card and keep adding resource, it's like my Kindle library. I probably order 50 Kindle books a year and I read 5. It's the same thing that happens on the cloud. It's so easy to do. It's hard to turn off. Yeah.
Well, and then, I mean, I guess at some point cost does become a factor, right? Because originally it's like, this is so simple, just get it up and running. But then at a certain point, when you have a certain throughput level of throughput, then that's when it's like, oh, whoa, hold on a second, should we be doing this?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So you've got a lot of horsepower where you are, and all we're really doing is sort of physically transferring the horsepower from these individual companies to one location, and you guys are managing it and providing better controls. I mean, the thing is, the horsepower is now going everywhere. You did the distributed computing stuff, so you understand. I mean, I've got more horsepower on my phone than we had like 5 years ago on in my desktop. So where is that going? Do you see that's going? Are we going to see some truly distributed computing at some point, or are we still going to see cloud for a really long time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a mix of all the above. There are reasons to have big monolithic platforms to go store your long-term data lake and things that you may need someday or not need someday, right? And I think increasingly people don't want to throw away data because you're really just as you turn that corner, you might need access to that data again because you've got some new machine learning algorithm that needs that data, right? Or you're in healthcare and you're regulated to keep your patient data for 7 years beyond the death of the patient. Well, you don't know when the person died, so you end up keeping it, for
That's right.
kind of forever. So I mean, I think there is
Mm-hmm.
that, and I think that makes total sense to have big, cheap, deep, storage that's on a network somewhere. I think then there's the more real time workloads that are really just in the beginning of its maturity cycle, and people kind of getting their heads around what is the art of the possible there. And then you've got everything that's in between, right? So I kind of think of it as the new three-tier architecture. I think ultimately when we get to 5G, and where you have a gigabit or 500 meg or whatever it might be to your cell phone, and to all the technology that you have, I mean, really then bandwidth becomes so easy to get, and you're not really constrained by it anymore. Means that if we're already generating 2 times the content we generated last year, and when does that then exponentially evolve to something even greater? And to solve for that, because we're not solving for speed of light, you've got to go distribute the processing. There's no other way around it. And I think that's what edge computing ultimately does, is goes and allows you to go create distributed architectures that we're in, again, the infancy of. Like, I think blockchain is a great technology to go drive distributed computing and distributed contracts, because ultimately you need a fraction of a resource for a period of time. What better way to go manage that than something like a blockchain ledger? So I think ultimately we cycle around. Like, we created the mainframe, and then we went to cloud. We created the internet, which was very distributed, and then we created a control structure around it with our vendors and our IANA and things like that. And then it's gone to, I mean, so I think ultimately all this stuff cycles, but it's all going to exist together in the same universe, right? So we'll have to figure out how to make it all work together. And I think I like to think of edge. I mentioned I was did some Sun Labs work. We were always trying to figure out how to go take chip architectures and figure out what we could do on the front end versus the back end. And I think of edge computing almost like the FPGA, right? It's you can go create very specific functions to go sort your data and make some real-time decisions, but ultimately make fast decisions on where to go put that in the future. And I think that's frankly what edge computing will enable us to do. And again, we're just at the beginning of it. I was just driving down the road about a month ago, past the University of Denver, and kind of almost drove off the road. And because I saw this, what looked like a cooler, like think of your standard sort of drink cooler, rolling down the sidewalk with wheels and a face on it.
Yeah.
I did some research on it, and it's a company called KiwiBot, and they partnered with Sodexo, which I think must run the cafeteria on the University of Denver campus. And so I called KiwiBot and said, hey, what is this? And they said, well, look, we've got, at any point in time, we have 12 to 20 of these roaming around on campus, and it's a completely contactless food delivery service that's running around on campus, going from the cafeteria to the dorms. And, such a great use case. But, what else could we be doing that? We could, cities in London, China, are doing that to go move blood supply around, move medicine around, drones, could. So I think we're just at the beginning of this, and it's really going to take more real-time communication, and higher bandwidth communication and video and all this type of stuff to make this really a reality. But it's like we're so close to it. It's like really just right there.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, it really is the pipe, right? Because if you think about autonomous vehicles, and we have something like that here. It's called Starship. They have it all around downtown Mountain View. So there's just these, like you said, coolers on wheels, like rolling around. But then if you think about these autonomous vehicles, they're not going to be online all the time. They're not going to be connected to the pipe. They might go into like a blind spot or whatever. And they're going to need to know, they're going to need to be able to make a decision, a split second decision, and they won't be connected to some cloud, which is going to help them with that decision. So they need to have that on board somehow, right?
Which is why they have, I mean, each of them have, 2 or 3 different, GPUs, video. I think there's an interesting, Tesla has done its technology stack that doesn't include LiDAR. Most other people use LiDAR. LiDAR is a great way to go do like millimeter, type depth data. I mean, I think they're all, looking at different things, but you're exactly right. The network is there to provide a bunch of mid to long-term data, i.e. how do you go avoid that car crash that's 2 miles up the road and reroute intelligently around it? Or how do you update the firmware on the platform, which is as important as anything these days. But you're right, there's no way that car, and it's sort of the funny thing, like over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, as we've talked about 5G, is it is the autonomous vehicle use case that everybody talks about. And I'm like, if my car has to utilize the network based on how my cell phone works, I'm not sure that that's the car I want to be in. But thankfully, companies like NVIDIA and Tesla and others have figured out how to get around that.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I heard about the Apple car. I'm like, I don't know if I want to buy an Apple car. Is it going to be as as good as my iPhone? I mean, when I have to reboot it every now and then and load new software and things like that. I'm not sure if I want to drive a car and then all of a sudden it's like loading, please wait, it pulls over to the side of the road. So
right, exactly. It is a little scary.
That's like suboptimal.
I think there's a story. Was it Slage or one of the lock manufacturers that that have some of the smart lock technology that sent out a firmware update over, I think it was probably about a year ago, but they ended up bricking about 50 door locks. So whatever the door, if the door was open or the door was closed, you could no longer open it up.
Oh man.
And then you've got all the 737 MAX stuff. Yeah, so I mean, I think we're still early days and maybe figuring out how all this stuff works in some way. But
oh yeah, I mean, think about smart homes, right? I mean, you have Alexa, you have all these different devices, and a lot of times you get into a situation where you can't control it unless you've got the device available. And if your network's down, you're out of luck, right? You have to. There's like manual controls on everything. You have to keep going over to. So.
Yep, for sure. For sure.
Man, so go ahead.
Trying to find that little reset knob that's hidden away somewhere and hope it does the job.
Exactly. Well, my Alexa smart plugs just like probably about once a month or so just completely lose their minds, and I have to reinstall them again. So it's like, from a technology perspective, they should be so easy that you just plug them in and they work, but nothing's that easy.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old X10 devices that
I remember those.
They ran off the electrical wires, and they would go crazy when your washing machine would start going, because it would create so much jitter on the network that it just all your lights went on and off. And
well, it's gone from being like a hobbyist thing to becoming like a semi-hobbyist thing, even though it seems to be really accessible to the regular person.
Right.
Regular people can't really configure these things. If you're a technologist, you know how to make them work, and you know how to make them like work okay.
Right.
But if you're just like a regular person, if they stop working, you're out of luck.
Well, yeah, and don't call me because I don't know anything about. I mean, it's like that. Like, now becoming the computer support guy to all your friends. It's like, I have no idea. I mean, it's gotten so diverse in terms of what is out there. It's like there's no possible way to get it. Yeah.
Exactly. So you said you've moved into an area where you're thinking about what's next. So what kind of stuff you were talking about? Like you mentioned in your note, like autonomous computing, AI, stuff like that. What kind of things are you looking into? What do you think is coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on some of it. I think we're cycling from a world where we had a bunch of platforms that were either in our office, and now we've kind of moved everything back into, more centralized cloud infrastructure, to kind of going back again where, because of latency in the network and speed of light and all the things we talked about, you've got to have processing power, differently maybe than we did before, but more closer to the actual, end user eyeballs, or the platform, or the IoT data points, or whatever it might be. Another thing that resonates with me is just kind of what we were talking about with autonomous vehicles, is the accessibility of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I mean, I remember in my early days in college, learning about neural nets, and you could only get to some fairly simple level of sophistication. You had to have kind of very well-known models, and it wasn't going to really solve any problems. Versus today, where you've got SDKs like CUDA from NVIDIA, and TensorFlow, and just the ability to go put a ton of horsepower against these algorithms that are now increasingly more self-learning, I think is really a lot of potential to sort through all the data that we're amassing. Video is another really interesting area. I think video is kind of the killer app for 5G. And I think just the amount of use cases that video, you just think about, I've always been a big fan of maps, because it can tell you so much. Like if you really dig into it, and it's like, well, what does that little icon mean? And what does this topography mean? And then you can start to visualize it. And that's the same with video for computers, is that while it took a long time for us to go put together the algorithms to ultimately decide, well, is this a picture of a cat or a dog? We now can determine, really almost everything from a video feed, given the right technology and the right, set of resources. So I think that's super exciting. I think it opens up, it's whether it's public safety, efficiency and transportation. I think last time I read, back pre-pandemic, we spent 9 days a year commuting. Just ways to go make our lives better, right? I think frankly is a great way to look at this technology. And there's, privacy and all that, concerns as well. But, the fact that in a manufacturing environment, if you can save, 4 or 5 lives by being able to shut down equipment because somebody wasn't wearing the right safety equipment or whatever, that's stuff that we can now tell from video and LiDAR. So yeah, I mean, I think those are all super exciting, ways that can help. And then frankly, that sort of democratization of all that technology, feeds into ability to do more efficient, drug research, doing, specific, research around a disease that maybe only has, a few thousand people rather than a few million people, which is where most of the drug companies pivot. And then being able to customize that based on, I mean, again, this is all just, stuff that's right there because of the ability to sort of harness the energy of a lot of this, whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, the GPUs, the, really the network, and how fast we're able to get systems to communicate together today.
Yeah, I think the biggest stumbling block is, of course, us, right? It's not technology. It's us being able to say, you know what? I'll listen to the AI when it says, okay, I have to shut the machine down, put my hard hat on, right? It's more of a just let me bypass that. Let me just bypass the security controls. I want to do my own thing. If we could just sort of sit back and go, these are systems that we're building to help ourselves. It's kind of like, well, I write down I do a to-do list because I want to make sure I don't miss anything, right? It's in the same category. It's like we're allowing AI to help us. It's not taking away our jobs. Yeah. It's helping us to do our jobs.
Do a job,
and I think that's a kind of a mindset change that we all need to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've been enjoying the Right Stuff series on Disney Plus, and it was sort of the thing that the early flight engineers, with Apollo and how much automation to go put in the cockpit, the early days of all that was fully automated flight. But man, the test pilots didn't want anything to do with that, because ultimately it's what they were good at. Right. And I think you kind of got to get to some level of balance there in terms of using the data in the ways that make sense. And yeah, I mean, I think that, something we've learned with the Boeing, 737 MAX stuff, right, is how difficult some of these software models can be, and making sure we spend the time understanding it.
Yeah, well, I think the big difference is that it's just hard for us to let go as humans when there's a better solution. I mean, I'm working with a client now who's rolling out a revenue management software, and the people who set the prices are like, well, this software is going to do better than me. And I'm like, well, this thing is gathering data from a billion different sources and is coming out with the absolute perfect price. How are you going to know? Oh, I got to know. Yeah. I'll know. And it's like,
yeah, probably not. Eventually it will do better than you. I mean, just look at, Chess, Go, others, absolutely.
If you just let it do better. And I think that's kind of like the thing. And you've probably seen this a lot when it comes to innovation. It's kind of like, these systems come out and we're constantly fighting them, even though they're doing better than us. We're constantly fighting them because we don't think they're going to do as well. And then, if we just let them do their thing, then they might surprise us.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So you're talking about
changing the human condition.
Yeah. Good luck, right?
Right.
So you mentioned something earlier about eliminating commuting, and I know that I did a study for one of my clients just a little while ago talking about the results of working from home, working from anywhere, and how it's sort of much better than anything, and it required a crisis like this for us to actually do it, even though we had the technology. I mean, are you finding that as well, or is it there? Do you have other aspects you want to discuss?
I think I mean, we have one customer, that I've maybe spoken about before on some other channels that is in the healthcare business, and they transformed kind of their telehealth, platform from 50 to 60 visits a month to, over 4,000 over the course of a month or two. And we've got another customer who's CEO, and they're based here in Denver, said, gosh, I got to actually see all my patients today because I didn't have to go try to find parking, or the bus wasn't late, or whatever. I do think about, there is a level of efficiency in all of this that I think is something that will endure. I do think, maybe as we progress, technology in this space, thinking more about augmented reality, virtual reality, maybe as a little bit of an replacement to this, because I still think I feel like there's a depth element that's still missing fundamentally from these experiences that you just don't quite get when you're in the same room with somebody. You can't see the body language quite as well. You can't see somebody sort of shifting in their chair. You can't see when somebody's like, frankly, just exasperated because they've been on Zoom calls too much. I mean, just all that. And we had a customer that brought this up in our advisory council a few weeks back, and he's like, we're kind of acquiring a fair amount of social debt here, as we've kind of gone through this, of not seeing, people outside of our pod for a period of time. And, what ultimately does that mean? So I'm kind of mixed on it. I think it's great. I've always had a global team, generally in my world. So I've always been working from anywhere and travel a lot, and, place is really just wherever my laptop bag has been.
Yeah.
But I do miss the getting together on a whiteboard, maybe having a social, opportunity. I think those are the things that really seem to be missing during this period. But I think for the most part, it's been amazing how, productive I think most companies have been able to stay during, this time, and pretty adaptable to be able to do it. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I know for me, I'm a little bit, my family would like for me to get back on an airplane soon and stop harassing them. So, yeah.
I know the feeling. But it's like, are you finding that your business is going through the roof now because of what's happening, or is it still steady state, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's the industry still, it's a resource consumption thing. So I mean, it's because of this, because of the acceleration, because of e-commerce, because of online everything, it's really, it has been an accelerant to the data center world. I'd say the only the only downside is it's a little bit hard for some people to get their projects done because they haven't been able to get people into the right place at the right time. And so we've been, spending a lot more time kind of trying to help them. But, we've also had our own, restrictions with depending on what region we're in, whether people can, we can really amass that many people. So there definitely is that. I think it's sort of what anybody in the 5G world would say, look, we kind of hit this period where, some of the 5G rollout, took a fairly major pause, and then it's kind of accelerating back. But it is still very difficult to get groups of people together to go get work done. So I do think it's slowed down a little bit, but digital consumption is here to stay, which is a good accelerant to our business for sure.
Mm-hmm. So you were talking a bit about 5G. Are you super familiar with the space? Because I always hear these stories about how awesome 5G is and how it's going to disrupt everything. And I'm wondering how much of that is still fact.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit of I keep saying 2025, and I've said 2025 for a couple of years now. So I'll still say 2025. I feel like, to me, and I'm kind of quantifying it as the 4G LTE network which I can pretty much get just about everywhere. I feel like that's 2025 for 5G.
Mhm.
Do I think it's going to change my personal life by 2025 in some amazing way? Probably not, because I don't really need to go stream
Mhm.
video any faster on my device. I think ultimately what it does do is or what it has done or is doing is sort of three things. One, we had to go put a bunch of fiber in the ground to be able to support it, and that's useful in a bunch of different ways. It's useful to provide more diversity in a location. It provides more redundancy in a location. So that's all good
Mhm.
when we're all counting on having that connection to go do whatever it is we need to go do. I think second, it it provides higher density of devices, which I think is sort of a second. Not so much the speed. It provides easier to connect more devices, which ultimately will bring the cost structure down for those devices. So I think that's a positive. And I think third is the ability to do more site to site type of connectivity, which I think ultimately will provide more redundancy back to the branch or back to the home or back to the office or back to wherever. And I think that's a positive, because as we start to get used to the online experience that we've all, I was just thinking about this today, like if I'm going to go skiing again, how is my skiing experience going to ultimately change? I'm going to want to order my lunch so that it's ready for me when I get down the hill. While I'm coming down the hill, I'm
Yeah.
not going to want to go wait in line, at a ski resort to go get my food. So, I think, as we think about this and then think about the mission critical services that have to go work in this environment, I think it does provide some additional redundancy and resiliency to the network as a whole that allow us to then count on it more and then go develop, sort of a cyclical thing. The more we can count on the network, the more we're going to develop more use cases to go consume the network. And then I think ultimately capacity becomes an issue, and more uploading video. And one of the things we're doing is working with some of the sports and entertainment people, like Major League Baseball as an example, and,
Mhm.
and thinking about that fan experience and how that changes, both with the pandemic impact and then the technology changes. Is that you think about the video feed at a ball game, and there's 100 cameras in that ball field, but you're only utilizing one or two or whatever the director wants you to go focus on at a particular point in
Yeah.
time. So if you can go create that sort of self-directed fan experience and get the play-by-play on from home plate, even though you're out on third, in the outfield, um, and pay for that, and then pay for all the data overlay on top of that, and then pay for your fantasy league overlay on top of that. I mean, that sort of draws the fan into something that, frankly, most of these organized sports platforms have been kind of losing a fan base over time. So they're all trying to figure out,
Yeah.
like, how do we go add more value? And I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, because so if you think about it, it's a self-curated experience. You're pushing more power into the hands of the fans, so they can create their own experience. But on the other hand, sort of like Major League Sports wants to curate the experience to a degree because they want that high quality experience. But at the same
Yep.
time, what is the fan, what's being left out, right?
Yeah. I mean, the analogy I've always used is like when as a kid, I'd go up to the Metrodome in the Twin Cities, and I could never figure out, like, why are people wearing radio headsets and these, remember, the big ones with the antennas. Why would they wear them in the ballpark? And it was because they wanted an alternate experience. They wanted
Yeah.
their sportscaster on whatever that AM station was, because he was much better at calling the ball than the guy in the stadium. And so
Yeah.
I think that's what kind of makes it kind of cool to be able to sort of change this and make it more dynamic.
Yeah, yeah, I think that people want that sort of multi-sensory experience and the choice to be able to say, I want to listen to this, I want to watch that, I
Right.
want to do whatever. And this
Yep.
sort of gives them that capability. But yeah, so you don't think that 5G is then going to like ultimately, enable edge computing to be the way, because it's not really that powerful. I
I
mean, I've heard
mean,
so many things about it being so amazing, and I'm pretty sure I'm very skeptical about it being.
yeah, I mean, 5G needs edge to be, you can't run 5G without a network control point that's more distributed than the architecture
Yeah.
today. does 5G enable edge? I don't think it's the other way around. I think it's a great enabler. I think it but a lot of IoT devices don't generate a ton of, more than a kilobit, Ks of data at a time, right? So they don't need big pipes. I think video is sort of the killer app for 5G and what we can go do with that. And I think ultimately it will need edge to be successful there. But I don't, I'm still reaching out there for what is that, it doesn't really change. I don't think it changes the world. I think we're already changing the world as we go here. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So where do you see things 10 years out? Like put your futurist hat on and look at 2030 or 2031, because it's almost 2031. Where do you think we'll be in 10 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope that we don't have to go through this experience again. I think
yeah.
I'm hopeful that we've taken what we've learned here and have built a scalable platform to be able to do the research and the mitigation and have better, if we could do anything with IoT, it's, let's create a sensor network that helps us understand this stuff faster. Probably some better global cooperation on that is necessary to be able to do it. I think the climate is another, I think last amount of data I saw was global climate, CO2 is down about 8%, which, if you think about it, the fact that for a few months we weren't driving cars as much, I'm probably talking about the US here, but really it's a world data. Mm-hmm. And now we're kind of back to normal. I mean, that was 8%, right? But in reality, we have to go reduce that 200, 300%. So I mean, I think we've got to pivot, what we're doing to really go solve those types of things. And there's companies that are doing great stuff there, but I think the world we've got to get an understanding of how to reduce, emissions, reduce the waste, and use this as a time to think about that and take our resources and work together to do that. And I think the data center industry itself is we do consume a lot of power, but we're generally, in industries like ours, we try to be as absolutely efficient as possible. You think about our designs in Portland, as an example, and we're at a power efficiency there that's really leading edge for any multi-tenant data center. So I mean, I think just making sure that we're all doing our part to make sure that we're using renewables, we're using things like wind and solar where it makes sense. We're using we customize every one of our data centers based on the environment that it's in. So in Vegas, we because it gets cold at night, we're able to do a lot of free cooling at night, where we don't have to go run as much cooling from the HVAC platform. So I think just being able to think about that when we're designing these platforms.
Yeah, well, I keep reading about data centers in remote locations, like in really cold places or underwater or whatever. But if you have to locate it over there, isn't there like debt in getting the data back and forth from those places? So that's a big issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, Iceland was data center space in Iceland has been a topic for I don't know, probably 20 years now. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the challenge, it has kind of limited network capacity. It's probably okay if you're on the East Coast. It's not okay if you're on the West Coast. Yeah, I mean, latency does, increasingly latency does matter when you're dealing with real-time apps that, increasing our making life, will make life and death, situations. And we're also not, I think our software stacks haven't evolved very well either. We've created very chatty applications that like to talk a lot to go do anything, right? So they're very chatty. They're
oh yeah, exactly.
And so you think about that. It's not just the one packet. It's the 1,000 packets that actually go. Yep. Make something happen. So yeah.
Well, sometimes I long for the good old days when we had a very small pipe, because you had to make your software super efficient to use that small pipe. Now our pipes are so fat, but it's like our software grows to fill the pipe and overflow the pipe. So we always have to put it in bigger pipes instead of going back to let's just write smaller code.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, we're going to run out of pipe because speed of light. So yeah.
Yeah.
Until we can.
Oh, you haven't figured out how to pass the speed of light yet? Where's your tachyon emitters? I mean, haven't you?
No, I do see your FTL devices in the background there, so they've got it figured out, but we haven't quite figured it out.
Soon, hopefully. Cool. So,
sure.
how do people? This has been fantastic. Thanks so much. So, how do people get in touch with you? If the LinkedIn, or does it go to your website, or?
Yeah, flexential.com, which is FLEXENTIAL, just to spell it out. But yeah, I can be found on LinkedIn. We're about to launch our new podcast format here soon, so we'd love to have you on the other side of this, Chris.
Fantastic! That'd be great.
Empowering hybrid IT, and I'm kind of working on the connected world and talking about the connected universe, a lot of which we just talked about here. So we're launching that in about a week or so. But yeah, LinkedIn is great. I'm pretty active on it. Please find me there.
All right. Well, send me your bio, and I'll put it in the show notes. So thank you very much, sir. It was great talking with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Have a great day.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.